Cool.
Thank you so much for sitting down to have a conversation today. So, I noticed that you have three letters after your name, CBE. Can you tell me what those mean?
Yeah, of course. But first of all, it's a privilege to be with you, and thanks for having me. I think what you're doing is great. Uh, the three letters CB stands for Commander of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, CBE for short, and it's an award, a recognition that the Queen gives out to people who are involved in public service or civic life in some way. My was for services to young people.
That's
It was quite
incredible.
fun. Yeah, thank you. I got to go to Buckingham Palace and I took my mom, who lives in Portland, Oregon, and taking her there and having Prince William give me the award was kind of a nice life moment. So, but after that, a pint of beer in London still costs £5. So, but it was nice.
Is that something you ever crossed your mind that would happen in your life?
I couldn't have imagined most of the stuff that's happened in my life. I didn't imagine, living in the UK. Certainly didn't imagine doing the gigs and the work we've done around the world, and couldn't imagine getting an award from Prince William. No, it was never part of some sort of strategic plan at all.
That's incredible. So you are a co-founder and the CEO of the international pro-social media company RockCorps. And legend has it that Rockcore was born around a pasta dinner table. Can you take us back to that night and share what the inspiration was and what you wanted to create?
Sure. So it's a group of friends, obviously, as the pasta dinner would kind of seem to indicate. And it was not too long after the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001. I was in New York that day, and the week after, I was actually in town doing interviews, had just finished business school, and was struck and connected the city was. It's something we've now sort of come to call the tsunami of kindness, but everybody was talking to each other, everybody was engaged. I'd never seen New York City like that before or since. And then we kind of went back to life as normal. The president at the time, George W., said, go back shopping, go on vacation. We'll go get them over in Afghanistan. And it seemed like a real opportunity was missed, that people wanted to engage with each other. And so my friends and I were sitting around at dinner and we thought, well, let's do something to capture that. We can't just let this moment go by. And we thought we were sort of in and around music quite a bit, various uh, angles, each of us. And we thought we'd do a benefit concert. But the problem with the benefit concert is it's not very democratic. So the model of a traditional benefit concert is high price tickets, artist donates their time, take money from high price tickets, and then give it to a nonprofit or charity to do good work. But that doesn't really allow for participation, young people, people who aren't really represented in that world. So two of our friends had done a nonprofit out in Colorado where they worked with local towns and sort of built hiking trails, and anyone who helped build the hiking trail could go see a gig. So they had sort of modeled this in a nonprofit local way. We thought that was really powerful. I had been, first part of my career had been working in a nonprofit, turned out about the nonprofit model of a sort of lack of ability to scale or sustain, and it was the reason why I'd gone to business school and tried to sort of figure this whole thing out. And one of the people at dinner, my co-founder and sort of the legend film director, TV director Chris Robinson, said at that moment, like, this isn't a nonprofit. That he does a lot of TV commercials, adverts, and he said the brands I work with, they're really talking about and asking about what he called sort of giving back or community. And he felt that this was another pillar of marketing communication, just the same way music or sport or film or gaming was. And I thought, wow, if that's true, that's a huge unlock. if we can work with the sort of marketing and brand ROI of a sponsor, now we're sustainable, now we're scalable. So that was really the kind of light bulb moment of thinking about a different way of doing something like this. Um, and this was democratizing so this benefit concert, which is, can we do a gig, a large gig, where you can't buy a ticket, you can't win a ticket, you have to earn it by doing 4 hours of work at a community volunteer project that we would also organize.
I love that. I What came to mind as you were talking about the approach that was standard as far as a benefit concert was, where it was really high ticket prices so that limited who could actually attend, and that money was taken and then given to an NGO to do good work. It's almost like you turned it upside down, where you said, instead of raising money through this concert, we're actually going to raise the other resource, which is humans and hands to do the work. And then through that work, they get access to the concert, which is a really interesting approach to take, a different lens that hadn't been taken before.
That's right. We often talk about the true legacy of these gigs is are the participants, the people who come, and they discover something about themselves. So when we promote it, they're coming to see a concert. They want to see Rihanna. They want to see Snoop Dogg. They want to see ASAP Rocky. That's the draw. It's an extrinsic desire. But through the work and this experience, they discover an intrinsic motivation. And you hear it when you talk to them or ask them to do a little piece to camera. They'll say, it just feels good. That's the language, right? It feels good to do something else. And oh, I think it's nice, but I really came because I wanted to contribute something. And that's a real visceral reaction around civic engagement. It's a muscle, we describe it. And once you discover that civic muscle, you'll go and do it again and again. And that's the real legacy of our gigs is sort of activating the civic muscle of anybody who comes.
That's incredible. And I love the way you describe it as a muscle, because that's something that it feels good, right? So the kids who are coming to donate their time are describing it that way. And that's something that they can do again and again and get that same intrinsic satisfaction from. One of the ways that on your website you describe what you do is providing the tools and opportunities for people to volunteer and get involved in their community. One person, one show, one city at a time. We enable people to change the world. And that reminds me of the Margaret Mead quote: never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has, which is so beautiful and so powerful. And you found a way to, I guess, put the ingredients together to where so many more people can get involved. They have an entry point to do something.
The music's very powerful about this. I think sometimes those of us who are involved in the sort of social action, volunteering world don't realize sort of how closed and not welcoming that can be. Like it almost communicates like you have to sort of be a certain type of person or a certain character before you can participate in whatever social action or community organization there is. It doesn't feel totally welcoming, and the music breaks down that barrier. So the first time, a 19-year-old can think, "Oh gosh, I didn't know this was for me. This is amazing. There's a bunch of other people like me. I can really relate, really get together with this, and have a lot of joy and a lot of fun." I think sometimes we don't allow people to sort of this should be really fun getting together in the community, participating, building, laughing, dancing, and it's the joy that we try and bring to it.
I love that. Um, RockCorps is a global celebrity endorsed program for brands based on the concept of give and get given. So the premise, as you mentioned, is really simple: give 4 hours of civic service and get given a ticket to the concert of the year. So Rockcore was part of the ascent of Kanye West originally, and since then has welcomed musical icons like Lady Gaga, Rihanna, Pharrell Williams, and Busta Rhymes. These are huge names of well known artists. So, how did you organize the very first event and get it off the ground?
So it's very easy to say, let's go and get sponsorship. Let's go find a brand partner. I'm sure we've all been in rooms or meetings that say, right, we'll get sponsorship to pay for it. But it's very difficult to do in reality. And none of us had ever really sold a sponsorship, not on that scale before. So it took us a couple of years after that first aha moment that Chris had introduced that this was going to be a brand partnership platform. We found now a very dear friend of ours and a visionary CMO, Daryl Cobbin, DC, who was running a newish brand at the time in the US, Boost Mobile. And he had a brand promise, a purpose called Boost Your Life, which was a great sort of marketing tent pillar to sort of communicate around, but he needed something to bring it to life in communities. We didn't have any track record. He knew Chris a bit because Chris had directed a few commercials for him. But it was really just on our vision that he decided to fund the first gig. We went to New York. We had to do the first one in New York. We convinced MTV to film it and put it on TV back when MTV put music on TV, television. And we then organized 75 community projects around the five boroughs in New York.
Wow.
There was always done in partnership with local nonprofits, so food bank, homeless shelter, um, city parks, clinics, always attaching to their mission. So it was at the end of the journey, there was really authentic work getting done. We invited 14-year-olds old and up to come down. If they do 4 hours of work on one of these projects, they could pick which one they like. We give them a ticket to come see the gig at Radio City afterwards, and it was just phenomenal in terms of bringing in first-time volunteers. We booked 9 artists, way too many artists for any gig. Aged a couple of years that night. Had some teething problems, but at the end we rocked out 5,000 volunteers at Radio City. MTV was really happy. The audience had a great time. Lots of goodness was released around New York, and we were off and running.
That's incredible. I'm blown away by the scale your very first one was. You didn't come out of the gates with a tiny test project, but you had MTV videoing it, the actual concert and putting it up. You had multiple projects across New York City. That's incredible.
We're obsessed by scale. I think incredibly uh, saturated media environment that we work in to even make any drop you have to sort of go big or go home. I didn't even know you could rent out Radio City Music Hall. Turns out you can if you can get a date. But we knew we had a vision. We wanted to make a real bit of noise in New York, and then hopefully that would be a good test case. That was our pilot to be able to take it around the states. We weren't thinking international at that moment at all, but it worked, and we went to Atlanta next, and I think have done gigs in 13 or 14 U.S. cities. So New York was seemed like the place to start.
That's incredible. And I have to say, having worked in brand marketing for many years, one of the biggest challenges as a brand marketer, well, there's a couple. One is most of the products we market are essentially commodities when you boil it down. And so it's how do you actually differentiate yourself from competition and stand out in an increasingly competitive marketplace. And one of the ways to do that, the most effective way, is by developing some sort of emotional connection with your consumer. And what you're offering brands is so interesting because not only are you playing on the cultural cool side with these artists and these exclusive concerts, but it's also the emotional side of these kids being able to be part of creating change through the volunteer projects, being able to be entered into this, I guess, volunteer community where they get to meet other people from different backgrounds who are also interested in A, the same music, and B, in giving back.
It can be a real sort of life moment for people to participate. We really believe, no surprise, in the power of moments. We that's how the narrative of your life is constructed. You remember a certain incident, a certain high, a certain low. It's how we tell the story of our lives. And when participants at Rockcore come down and they do, at first they kind of think it's too good to be true. I just had to do 4 hours packing food at a food bank or painting a classroom. These people must be crazy. And how much can get done in 4 hours? They bring a friend down sometimes. Sometimes they come on their own. They join 50 or 100 other people. They see how much can be done. It's really tremendous how much work can be done by 100 people in 4 hours if it's well organized and executed. But then they walk into a concert hall with two, three, 5,000 other people and realize everybody's done the same thing. And now we're going to dance? Like no one's going to talk to me and shrink my head about what it means to be a good citizen. We're just going to party. Like that's a really powerful, visceral experience that can really inspire you in a new direction.
That's really incredible. Now, I'm curious how you measure impact for Rockcore. What qualifies as success for you?
So we think about impact on multiple levels because we're sort of this conduit between a number of elements that don't necessarily always connect. So from one end, we're working with the marketing, communication, sponsorship, content, sort of budget for our brand partners, and those that investment requires a certain return. We're working with community groups, nonprofits, NGOs, charities, and they expect, and they deserve a return for their involvement. So how do we measure that? But then I mentioned the legacy is really the participants, and so what's successful there? For us, it's pretty simple. If we can return on the investment to our brand partners, then we're going to continue. We'll be able to go to new places. We'll be sustainable. So we spend a lot of time on making a positive ROI to the brand, and hopefully for the brand, if we do our job right, we're sitting right between the social purpose agenda and the marketing agenda. And there's often, as you know, some tension between those two goals within a company. And hopefully we kind of can say it's not either or, it can be a both and. We can have content, we can have artists, we can have influencers, but we can also do really important community work and engage our customers and our audience and our communities. And so we focus a lot on that return. Very sort of basic brand metrics that you would expect. First of all, do people know about the program, whether they participated or not? That's very important. Do they know that our brand partner was associated with it and very much a part of it? That's important. So measuring that. And then from there, how does that make you feel about the brand compared to the competitive set? All kinds of brand love metrics, such as um, purchase intention, but also brand that gets me, is involved in the community, shares the same values that I do, and then purchase intention. It's very difficult. Anybody in sponsorship will tell you to draw a line between sponsorship and purchase, but we do as much as we can, and the audience really wants it. First when we kind of went into this world, like, oh, with Boost Mobile, we can't really talk about the handsets or the service plans at the volunteer events. Like that's mixing too many worlds. But that's the second question that the young volunteers ask after, are there going to be any surprise artists at the gig? Is, hey, how can I get a new handset, or what kind of discounts can I get? So this merging of the brand message and the social message has become sort of second nature to us.
That's so interesting. And I love how you framed it as a not an either or, but a yes and, not just within a company between the marketing department and the social impact department or corporate social responsibility. But I think also as you were describing the matrix of different stakeholders that you're balancing what's important to them. So the company and also the nonprofit organizations you're working with, and also the kids, and also probably the artists you're working with, and finding the intersection of what is the real sweet spots that's important to all of them or that will move the needle for all of them based on what it is their objectives are. I think that's really, really powerful and really interesting to use the yes and filter instead of the either or filter.
Interesting. When we were first doing this, so the world's moved quite a bit in 17 years around purpose and social impact. And but at first people said, "Well, you're a nonprofit organization yourself, aren't you?" And we said, "No, we're a private company. We're owned by the founders, and potentially profit distributing. Although we have never had a distribution, we just put the money back into new projects so far." But there is sort of an expectation that the world's moved on or advanced from, and that, well, if you're doing good work, then there shouldn't be any shareholders behind that. But it's always, you have to kind of look about where the value exchange is. So we're providing, we believe, a better version of marketing and communication to our brand partners because the social purpose is baked in. So, our competitive set are other music festivals, other campaigns, whether they be in real life or digitally. And, those providers are private companies just like we are. So people have gotten used to this blending in a way that they weren't at the very beginning. I think it's made it a lot easier, and it's opened the lane up quite a bit for other entrepreneurs to be able to talk about the social agenda and bake that into their operation.
Absolutely. And also, it's just become, impact has become more and more part of cultural awareness with the newer generations, as far as an expectation that companies consider the environment, they consider society, that they take a stand for things. And particularly the younger generation, consumers want to see that in companies. 95% of millennials say that they would switch brands for a good cause. And so being able to, as a company, talk about the impact that you're making and how you're being intentional about the decisions you make or where you invest or who you partner with or how you're using your marketing dollars can have a really big impact on the way consumers perceive you.
I think that's right. And you can really see it. We're very optimistic. I don't think it's happening. The change isn't happening fast enough. So I'm glad to be talking to you about it. Voices. But when you talk to sort of people maybe under 25 about a social entrepreneur and say, oh, it's social entrepreneur, we're social entrepreneurs. Like, what's a social entrepreneur? You kind of describe it and you go, I don't get, it's just an entrepreneur, right? Like, why would you start any business that didn't have a social purpose kind of baked into it? It's so much more natural than it was, a generation ago. The distinction of we have to add the social into it, that's sort of a construct of our generation. Like in these days, you wouldn't think about starting a business if it didn't have some sort of positive externality to its operation. It's baked in. So that's what gives me optimism.
Yeah, and I love that you used the term positive externality because I feel like in cultural vernacular, typically when we talk about externalities, it's almost become synonymous with negative, right? So we talk about externalities of businesses being pollution or waste, but there can be positive externalities as well from the way a business is set up. If they're thinking about paying fair wages or fair trade or so many other examples of positive externalities. And I think having more of a holistic conversation around the impact, both negative and positive, that a business can have is better.
100%. I think when the penny really dropped for me was we were at an entrepreneurs conference at a business school and on a panel. Um, and one of the other panelists at the time was an executive at Zipcar. When I kind of saw the whole program, I didn't quite get like, why is Zipcar on this social impact panel? And in their opening remarks, they sort of explained that, you know, every day that CEO gets up to increase shareholder value, and I believe broadly, it's a blank statement, capitalism is a force for good. And when it's correctly controlled and wired right. And so every day that CEO wants to increase shareholder value. And how do they do that? By selling more memberships to Zipcar. It's like, okay, I'm with you so far, but I don't get it yet. And for every, I can't remember the exact math, but just roll with me on this. So for every 10 memberships that are sold and car sharing gets more ubiquitous, that means another car never gets manufactured and there's one less car on the road and needs parking and so on and so forth. And that really was another light bulb moment for me on this journey where by pursuing shareholder value, the world could be improved at the same time. And we were
Mm.
always taught, and it's baked into our semantic language here, which is for profit, non-profit, good, bad, evil, um, and the fact that there could be business models that had these positive externalities as the company pursued its objective, which is to increase its enterprise value, was really it's not too much of an overstatement to say it changed my life.
Absolutely. And I think it's such an important frame to look through because something that I say a lot is the biggest global challenges are also the biggest business opportunities if we can think of a way to approach them. Um, and so the biggest challenges that we face, whether it's climate change, whether it's poverty, whether it's inequality, whether it's financial inclusion, if you can think about a way to approach it, it can actually be a viable revenue stream for whatever company is looking to address it. They aren't mutually exclusive. So the as you were talking about binary words as nonprofit or for profit, good or bad, you can actually use capitalism as a force for good and still generate profit at the same time.
Most definitely. I mean, it's the incredibly powerful. It's lifted a lot of people out of poverty. You look at living standards in any country. Again, blanket statement, and there are terrible exceptions to the blanket statement, but it's pulled a lot of people up. Now it's getting out of control in certain segments, and as we talk about climate change, I like thinking of it as an opportunity that helps me go to sleep at night. Some days it doesn't feel like an opportunity, and it's not my original statement, but I think you're right. Probably, Jeff Bezos, richest person in the world, figuring out, real time delivery of, how to get your bin lighters replaced in the same day. Uh, I think probably the first trillionaire will be the climate change entrepreneur who's cracked that one. So that's the optimistic view for sure.
Mm-hmm. Now, taking a step back, just for the listeners, I would love for you to give a definition. So, one of the ways you describe Rockcore is that it is a pro social organization. How would you define pro social?
We sort of intentionally use that word because it is a bit ambiguous, but you know what's happening there. It's positive, it's helpful, it's got warm vibes around it. It's promoting, positive outcomes just by the very nature of those two words put together. I think we we were a little cautious, and I know, Kathy, we're talking on the purpose and profit platform here, but we're a little nervous about the word purpose just because it kind of can get sucked up and become a new thing in business that we worry about, right? So um, you don't want it to be, you know, we don't want to get sort of beyond purpose, right? Like we're careful, we're really sort of careful of those nomenclatures that can be hot for a minute and then go away. I'm not saying purpose will, but whether it's when when you had you had your digital department, and now that kind of got consumed to your digital agency, and so the same thing around purpose. So we chose pro social as our descriptor because it broadly lets you know what's happening here, but also allows us the flexibility to do different things.
Mm, I like that. Now, I'd love to talk a little bit about, and I know we've touched on this a bit, but I'm going to ask it just directly. So, when you think about some of the different brands you've partnered with, can you explain why brands seek out Rockcore to partner with you?
Yeah, so um, I think we do sit in this intersection between a social purpose, a brand purpose, and marketing and communication. So, you and I do think there is still some bit of negotiation or understanding of, where is the soul of a brand defined? Is it defined through its purpose activities, or is it defined through its kind of marketing communication or its product activities? Where is the real soul of a brand? Our hope is that we're back to the both and. The answer to those questions to us is yes, and we can help to express your promise, demonstrate your purpose in a really tangible way that works in a marketing, communication, content atmosphere. And so I think, when we line up well with the brands, like, right, okay, so I can see how this fits our company corporate objectives as good citizens, but there's also some really cool artists and entertainment, and we're sitting right at that intersection. So, I talked the story about Boost Mobile, how when DC was first really bringing the brand to life on a national basis, they talked a lot in their ads about boosting your life, getting a pay as you go phone into the hands of people who couldn't access a contract. That was really important, but boosting your life had to mean more than just a mobile phone, a cell phone contract. It had to mean something tangible in communities. So we brought that brand promise to life. And the same thing's happening now. We're working in the UK on a new project called Apprentice Nation, very similar, adjacent to the work we described around volunteering. And our lead partner is BT, British Telecom, and their kind of communication is BT Beyond Limits. And they have the wonderful ads and sort of marketing collateral and communication. But Apprentice Nation is where we bring that to life. It helps young people go beyond their limits and break down barriers. And so we can really help bring brand's purpose to life and say, right, we mean that. We mean Rockcore. We mean young people getting involved in their communities, taking positive action. That's what our brand stands around. And when we say these things in our communication, we can point there and look at real people and real change.
Mm. And I think I love what you said at the end. When we say this in our communication, that this is what we stand for, we can point to real people and real change. And that proof point is so important because consumers are so much more savvy now because we've seen greenwashing or pro social washing from companies that just want to get credit for it without actually doing the work on the back end. And so having those proof points of saying that we as a company believe in these things that we're saying in our ads, and this is actually what we're doing, and this is the impact that we're having, and being able to share that is incredibly important from a brand authenticity and credibility standpoint.
I think if you follow the chain of communication, there better be somebody at the end of it doing something real, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
a kid learning to read, or a hungry person getting some food, or a homeless person getting some shelter. It has to be authentic, and hence why we have always partnered with nonprofits, because we want to support the work that these NGOs have been doing year in and year out, and listening to. Got an army of volunteers. We've got a megaphone. How can we help? Because they're the domain experts in whatever city and whatever country we're in, as opposed to just making up a campaign that was created in New York or London or somewhere. It has to be tied into the grassroots.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned Apprentice Nation really briefly, which is your newest initiative. Can you explain what that is?
So it was born out of a series of realizations that we had. So we're piloting in the UK, but we have plans where if you look in the UK, and it's very similar pattern in the US. So of high school graduates in the UK, about half go on to university. And we all know about sort of life chances and economic security that a university degree or badge gets you. And the half that don't go to university, less than 1 in 10 are getting to any kind of formal training. UK has a formal government supported apprenticeship program, which is 40 hours a week, 32 working for a company, 8 hours of training. So learning while earning is fantastic. But less than 1 in 10 of non-university goers get into that. Then it gets even worse when you look under the bonnet. So the less than 1 in 10 that are getting into that vocational training, career training, it skews upper strata and economic level. It skews upper strata in terms of being white and not representative. It skews of people who are already coming from a credentialed household. So the thing that was meant to help young people with that first rung on the ladder isn't even going to those groups. And we just found that incredibly messed up and continue to find that messed up. So we partnered with a company that does apprenticeship training called Multiverse. And we said, well, we know a little bit about what to do with that with the RockCorps model. So they're very similar, but more focused on career and life skills development for 16 to 24-year-olds. It has a gig. We we we've been able to continue. We do the gigs online these days, so people don't actually come. You have to watch it on YouTube or streaming platform of your choice. And the idea is we have these artists we work with who have really inspirational stories about how they got to where they were, the roadblocks that they overcame, the steps they took. So they perform, but also tell their stories, and then that launches sort of a what we call a sort of an edition. So each edition has 9 to 12 hours of online learning content. Some of it's live, some of it's on demand, and you learn things, really basic things like how to polish your resume, top interview tips, networking, finding a job, digital skills, but also goes, to very specific topics that can be helpful. How Black Lives Matter movement influencing employers, how to job search with a criminal record, really practical stuff that we think there's sort of a gap in, certainly in the way it's presented. And a lot of the content is presented by the artists themselves. So it's a bit of entertainment and there's a bit of education, a little bit of both really works. And we're getting tremendous uptake. I mean, it's just, the unemployment crisis, unfortunately, in both UK and US, it's not really an unemployment crisis. It's a youth crisis. We're in real danger of leaving a generation taking some rungs out of the ladder and helping them get on their way. And Apprentice Nation won't solve all of it, but we think it's a pretty good model, and we're having some real good success with people using the platform to help them get to where they need to in their life and their career.
That's really interesting, and it sounds like it's a way of breathing energy and life into the job training and learning process that tends to be lacking in both energy and life. So well done there. And one question on when you're talking about the statistics for the apprentice track within the UK, is the reason of the 50% that aren't going into college that I think you said 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 10 goes into this apprentice track program? Is it capped at how many it accepts? Is that why it's limited there? Or
No, I mean
are
there
the
is,
rest not applying?
yeah, so it's mostly the latter. So let's
Okay.
and but it's two sides of the coin. So there's huge disruption now with Corona with COVID. So in a normal kind of steady pace. So there's a lot to talk about, and we could turn this discussion into employment in the post-pandemic world, which is incredibly important. But in a normal kind of regular canter, the problem is the matching. So you have a lot of companies who are saying we're not getting the right kind of applicants coming through. They're not work ready. And so there's a bit of a barrier there. And the young job seekers themselves aren't even really sure about some of these pathways. Schools these days aren't really preparing our graduates for the world of work. So there's a real mismatch going on. So the job seekers don't know that some of these routes are even available to them, and the companies themselves aren't finding the applicants are work ready. And particularly in what we call non-cognitive skills. I don't like the term soft skills because they're so critical. They're not soft, but communication, teamwork,
Mm-hmm.
resilience, problem solving, etc. And so, our program is sort of meant to fill that gap, but doing it with the music. So this is an incredibly exciting time of your life. It should be fun. And I think not for lack of trying, but often a lot of sort of career development, life skills development programs for 16, 24-year-olds tend to be a little not very accessible, right? They seem to be really serious, and you have to have a certain bit of prep already there. So
Mm.
we use the artist. We think the messenger is just as important as the message. Take an aspirational person, have them share their journey, put an arm around everybody, sort of like you're, a cool older sister saying, "Look, I got you. I've been here before. I know how to help you get on your way." And we think there's a real role for that.
That's incredible. I mean, teaching the kids what options are actually available and then getting them ready for the companies that are looking for them, right? So filling that gap as you mentioned before.
I think we
Now,
have a
one of
real crisis. Sorry, go ahead, Kathy. I'll pause there. So we can talk a lot about the education system. I think we have a real gap in terms of matching our 18, 19, 20, 22 year olds with the jobs for tomorrow and the companies that are seeking them. And I think if it's not a crisis now, it's certainly a looming one.
I totally agree. And I also think, a big part of that is as a youth, really understanding what the options are and what they actually look like in real life, in the day to day, and being able to get exposure to that. I think, at least within the US, there's a huge opportunity to fill in that gap with kids.
There's it's the same with our volunteering social action sort of side of things, which is, you know, not deliberately, but we just sort of put signs up that sort of say not welcome here. This isn't really for you. And whatever we can do to say no, absolutely. These companies are really eager diversify their workforce, find people from underrepresented backgrounds. So are the organizations that are doing community work. It's just there's a little bit of a gap between, and that's where we think music and culture can really play a role.
Mm. And I think another piece that you do, which you haven't mentioned directly, but I would say is incredibly important, is the facilitation of that gap. And so yeah, you're using music and culture as an attraction piece, but you're doing a lot of heavy lifting on the back end to help facilitate between in Rockcore between the companies that you're working with, the brand sponsors and the NGOs, and then the artist as well, and making the events happen and the volunteering happen. And then within Apprentice Nation, it sounds like you're doing a lot of the facilitation again between the artists and the kids to help with that training and that knowledge learn and that career preparedness. And then also with the companies that are looking for diverse candidates to fill their pipelines. So there's a lot to be said for that, for the work you're doing from a facilitation standpoint.
It's what we call the last mile, right? So if we're anything, we're sort of last mile experts in terms of taking a large piece of communication, recruitment campaign, inspiration campaign, and connecting it down to real action for a real person in a real locale. And
Mm.
it's easier said than done. There's a lot of logistical sweat that goes into that last mile to making it successful for all parties.
As you're saying that, I'm literally smiling. Having worked in the nonprofit world before, anyone coming from that world knows that the last mile is the hardest mile entirely. Like when you're distributing products to people in need in crisis in developing countries, it's that last mile that's the biggest hurdle. And so when you say it's like, oh, last mile, not a big deal, but no, that's actually the hardest part.
For sure.
All right. Well, I know we're running towards the end. I have a couple more questions I would love to ask you. One is, as you look towards the future, what is your ambition for Rockcore and Apprentice Nation?
So we just really love what we're doing. We think that if we're inspiring one uh, person to become a real change maker, then it'll all have been worth it, right? So if there's a Nelson Mandela in our midst, then it'll all be worth it. So we have a we try, and it's hard when you're doing big gigs. We try and keep a humble sort of self-deprecating vibe going around. Like, it really is about giving the tools and opportunities, and it's one kid, one city at a time to change the world. So it's a lot of small moments that hopefully lead up into something big. So we think coming out of the pandemic, there's we're all talking about the hunger to go back to you know our lives in whatever form. So going to sports or going to music festivals, going to concerts. We hope that Rockcore can play a role in that because yes, it's great that we're all going to go back to festivals together, but how about if we build a school or a health clinic on the way there? So
Mm.
um, let's pick up a hammer before we dance. I think that's a message that can really resonate as we've all gone through this collective thing globally, and it's still going on. I mean, just look at what's happening in India now. So we think there's a real role to play for using the music for social action, and the same on Apprentice Nation. We think every day about how we can, put more support out there in our small way for young people on their career journey, work with more brands to bring that message out and really tell that 19-year-old who feels a little stuck, no, we mean you. This is for you. We
Mm.
want you here. You should feel a sense of belonging in what we're doing. So, yeah, we hope to take Apprentice Nation here to the US as well as into Europe for now. And yeah, just looking to do more rockcore gigs otherwise.
That's incredible. Now, is there anything we didn't touch on that you want to share?
I mean, it's a lot of fun to talk through this stuff with you. I appreciate the chance to do it. I think it's a really But two things. I think it's a really interesting time for those of us that are passionate around this area, in that a lot of people are now interested, having come through the last 15 months that we have, about, so are there different and better ways of working together? Can we get rid of the word consumer, and can we talk about citizens and members and participants? So many people, we call it sort of the tsunami of kindness, came running forward to say, how can I help? Is there food delivery? Do people need to be driven? Can I help staff a vaccine center? So many people took their very first social action. But on the other side, a tsunami can be very dangerous in that it can cause a lot of damage, and a lot of people got stuck. So their regular volunteering, whether it's with a little league or a music group, got put on pause, and they're really hurting and really lonely right now. So I think for those of us who have been doing this for a while, to encourage everyone to maybe watch one less Netflix series that they don't need, and increase their civic participation, and just see where we go with that. The time seems to be now. I mean, everything's been pulled apart, and how we reconnect is up for grabs.
Mm, I love that. What came to mind as you said that was that phrase, if not now, when?
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. For sure. And it's this, hopefully, knocking on wood, this isn't going to come around in this way anytime soon. So, let's see what we can do with it.
I love that. Now, where can people find you online? Follow what Rockcore is doing, what Apprentice Nation is doing.
Yeah, so please come check us out. We'd love to talk to you. We have both a Rockcore website and Apprentice Nation website, and you can kind of cross back and forth. And we're on the socials there for sure. I do a lot of my own sort of engaging. I use LinkedIn a lot and a little bit of writing, but mostly connecting with other people. So please find me, Stephen Greene, Rockcore on LinkedIn. We'd love to connect.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time, Stephen. This has been an incredible conversation.
Thanks, Kathy. It's a real privilege.